What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about something that Smith & Wesson has come out that's supposed to make things easier. This is the M&P 9 Shield, the easy version. A lot of things make this thing supposedly easy, in theory, by Smith & Wesson, but easier for women, people that might be more feeble, weaker. Look, let's call it what it is. We are not all equal. We have equal opportunities, but we are not all equal. This is a fact that some people might find offensive. Men are, for the most part, stronger than women. Sorry, I know that probably hurts a lot of feelings out there, and that does not subscribe to the same type of things that polite societies are trying to get you to say, because we're all equal. We're not all equal. I can do things that my wife, who is smaller and weaker than me, can't do. That's why this was designed. Smith & Wesson can't tell you that, but Smith & Wesson did that for a reason. Let's take a closer look at the Smith & Wesson M&P Easy for Women, Feeble, and Weaker People pistol. Let's first take a look at what makes this thing easy in terms of how Smith & Wesson defines it. Of course, you have a couple things that are very, very different from the M&P 9 Shield that you may already have. First thing you're going to notice, this thing has a grip safety on it, very similar to a 1911. It's also a hammer fired like a 1911. It's not striker fired like the older or previous non-easy M&P Shield. You'll notice that on the inside there's a distinct hammer there that's going to follow through versus a striker fired device. The texturing is a little bit easier easier on the hand, I should say, than the traditional M&P Shield 9. Again, I guess that's to make it easier on females and feeble people's hands. I get it. I don't like a super aggressive texturing, but I do like an aggressive texturing that is aggressive enough for sweaty hand conditions, potentially gloves being used. But I get it, if we're talking about somebody that has more tender skin or whatever, you don't want that super aggressive texturing. And this thing was not, I guess, I'm not the target audience when it comes to this, so I guess it doesn't matter what I say. The grip safety being there, I don't know if I like this. Let's face it, our biggest increase in shooters is female shooters. Unfortunately, there's not enough trainers out there that are doing a good enough job training people, so I'm not sure if the appropriate grip is going to be taught and communicated properly enough to where everybody's going to be utilizing this pistol in the correct fashion. In other words, engaging that grip safety. I know if you make a proper grip, if your fundamentals are right in your grip, you are going to naturally engage this. This has nothing to do with how Smith & Wesson designed the gun. It's designed properly, okay? Again, it's the application of fundamentals that I worry about. I worry about a female, unfortunately, who has been taught by her husband or boyfriend, which we know can be some of the worst teachers for multiple reasons. Most guys think they know everything about guns, and most women will not listen to their significant other. It's just a fact, guys. So a guy teaching his girlfriend or wife is probably the worst thing. The guy in the stall next door is probably more capable of teaching or at least getting through to that female than her own spouse or boyfriend. So teaching the fundamentals of grip may be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, and I just worry that might not get through and have somebody not engaging that grip safety properly. That's my only knock against it. There's no other knock. I'm not going to have any problem engaging that and taking a shot off. What it does do is it takes the safety from the actual trigger of the standard traditional shield and puts it back here. Now you don't have that trigger safety that most of your striker fires are going to have, again, because this is hammer fire. I do feel like the type of serrations that Smith & Wesson puts on these types of pistols is always good. I've always liked that. I know they look good, that kind of scale look, but at the same time, very functional. It's very easy to get a good grip on that. Also like these little ears, wings, whatever you want to call them, that are on the back of the slide. I think that's nice and aiding to that nice grip. On most of these pistols like this, the way those serrations are cut into the slide, especially on this one, it bevels the gun inward and makes it more narrow where the serrations are. So it just makes sense to put them back here, because what it does is it makes the back wider to give you something better to grip hold of, but it also matches the width of the overall pistol anyway. So it doesn't make it wider in essence, it just makes it as wide as the frame. So that's a nice touch too. This particular model comes with a thumb safety as well. I do feel like when we're teaching people, and again, I'm not passing judgment on other people or women or anything like that, but if it's a new shooter, I do feel like in some cases, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I do feel like a new shooter should have access to a thumb safety. Whether they use it or not is perfectly fine, but I want as many safeties as I can actually put on a pistol whenever I'm working with a new shooter. Again, you can choose to not engage that if you prefer. That's perfectly fine. But let's give our new shooters enough peace of mind, and it may be just that peace of mind to where they feel safer by having that. A lot of people still can't get the whole thing of, oh, I don't have a safety on there, even though we know we technically do have a safety on here. Some people can't get beyond that. And again, if it's nothing more than peace of mind that we're giving them by putting this on here, let's do it. Because as I say, if you have confidence in your firearm and you're confident and you feel safe and efficient with it, that's going to make you wield it better. You're going to make better shots because you're not timid. So let's do that if that's necessary. I don't have a problem with that. I do feel like the rear ledge, or I wish the rear sight would have had a ledge on it for that tabletop or belt charging. However, again, if this is targeted after women, I don't see a whole lot of women making these super duper tactical reloads with their belts and tabletops and all that. Probably not a big deal. It does have a loaded indicator on the top, a visual indicator. I like that. I don't like to rely on those because I still like to treat every gun as if it's loaded, and hopefully somebody does not see that. The downside whenever there's a loading indicator, this is just me, but I feel like if a person who isn't conditioned to be super safe whenever they're operating a firearm, you know, we like to treat every single pistol, every single rifle, shotgun, whatever, as if everyone's loaded, even when we know it's not loaded. And I don't like the fact that somebody may look at this and go, the load indicator is not poking up, it's not visual, so I'm not loaded, so I can do whatever I want, and I'm not endangering anybody. I don't like that frame of mind. As long as we teach that loading indicator is just peace of mind, that now it's okay to pull the trigger because you do have a round in there, I don't think the loading indicator needs to be looked at as the gun is safe to point anywhere we want. That's the teaching of fundamentals. Again, that's our job as teachers to do that. If the student is taught wrong, it's not their fault for not learning it properly, if they're taught wrong. So that's on us. So again, that's my only concern there. It does have a rail on the front. You're going to be able to put some lights, lasers, whatever kind of accessories you prefer on there. It is undercut under the trigger guard. Again, one of the things we definitely want to look at, since this, even though it's an easy, we still want to make sure that whoever, if they're buying this gun, they're probably a little bit weaker anyway. So we want to make sure they are getting high up so they can lower that bore axis into their hand, and that's just another way to do it. So I like the fact that they still do that because we can give that person all the advantages they can have in order to shoot that. Now, speaking of the easy, of course, the recoil spring is much, much lighter. So that's where the charging, it's relatively effortless. Now, don't get fooled. If you've got a Glock in a 9mm or something like that now, or an M&P Shield, and you go to charge it, talking to weaker people, feeble people, whatever, and you find that you have a little bit of trouble, don't think this is going to solve all your problems. Unfortunately, Smith & Wesson has lightened it up to the point where it can still function properly. Let's remember, this slide not only has to go back, but it has to come back forward too. Now, when it goes back, if you put too light of a recoil spring on there, that slams the slide rearward, and at some point it's going to damage the gun. So Smith & Wesson still has to put a strong enough recoil spring on here to where it still goes back and gently hits at the back of the frame before returning forward. So we still have to have a strong enough recoil spring to do that, and again, not damage the gun. Smith & Wesson does not want to receive a bunch of these back simply because they put too light of a recoil spring, making it easy to charge the gun. Speaking of that, and I am putting that on a decal on my vehicle, by the way, I'm not scratching the paint. They've also done the same thing with their magazines. They've put these little arms on each side of the follower along with these little rails that you see. You see these typically on a .22 long rifle type pistol or gun where you're loading it and you're pulling this thing down. They've actually implemented this on the 9mm magazine. So again, a nice touch as far as ease of loading. You know, look, full-grown men can do this also. They can all take advantage of that. I don't find that these magazines are hard to load anyway. They're a lot easier to load, and it's probably because it's more of a single stack. The Glock double stacks are typically some of the harder magazines to load, so maybe if this were the same style double stack and it had this feature on it, it would really make a difference. I don't find that the single stack, especially the single stack, but the Smith & Wesson M&P magazines are already not hard to load. So again, not necessary for me, but some people may find it harder. But how does the thing shoot? What I did is I got my godchild. She definitely got her looks from me, thank God. And I wanted her to shoot it because I felt like with me shooting it, it's not showing you guys anything. It's not giving you any indicator that it's any easier to manage the slide or anything like that. So I wanted her to take a couple of shots. So let's take a look at Ashley over here, not only loading our magazines up as she's doing here with her Armscor ammunition, but I also want to get a couple of pretty good shots of her firing it and see how she manages to control the EZ if it's easier. Shooting this thing is pretty much a breeze. One thing I do notice is that with the lighter recoil spring, I can feel that slide hitting back a little bit with a little bit more effort. Not a bunch of force. This is not a heavy slide to begin with, so there's not a whole lot of mass going rearward anyway. So it's not like it's disrupting my flow or anything like that whenever I shoot. It's just a little bit more noticeable. Again, it doesn't change how you control the weapon or anything like that. As you can see, Ashley had no trouble shooting it, even with that lighter recoil spring, so it was really easy for her to control. We did notice for some reason, and I'll take a better look in post to see what the problem was, but you notice on one of her early shots, we did have a failure to feed. And not sure if that was, usually you're gonna expect the limp wristing issue to be more of a stovepipe. So, I mean, she didn't stovepipe. It's just a matter of the round didn't load. I'm not really sure what the issue is. Again, I'm gonna look at that in post. I have not taken a close look at it yet. But if we find what the issue was, we'll put it down below. But Ashley had no trouble shooting the gun. Clearly, I had no trouble shooting the gun. I do feel like this would be a great gun for a person that might be timid about shooting to try. Sometimes even before you fire the gun, you can be intimidated by it because you can't rack the slide and because you're having difficulty loading the magazines. I mean, psychologically, we want all the advantages we can have, especially to a new shooter. And if we have a new shooter that's struggling to load a magazine and then they struggle to pull the slide back, you know they're really thinking, I haven't even shot this thing yet, and I'm already feeling intimidated. Now I got to pull the trigger. So we may be creating a little bit smoother path from the time that the person is introduced to the firearm to when they actually pull the trigger. And if that's the case, I welcome it, as long as we're doing this safely and we're teaching all the other safety and fundamentals that we need to get that new shooter comfortable shooting the pistol. The only downside that I see for this thing, I'm not a fan of 8 rounds. I feel like 8 rounds, especially if we're targeting new shooters by putting this gun out there, even trained shooters are missing 50% of their shots in a high stress situation. So with 8 rounds, I feel like I'm only giving people that do train 4 effective rounds to shoot with. That's not including the person who may have problems shooting and is not quite as efficient. So that's the only downside I see to the M&P 9 Shield EZ. I think it's kind of gimmicky, but not in a bad way. Again, if we can find a way to get new shooters into the shooting sports, shooting industry, and carrying guns safely and efficiently, I'm all for it. That's what we need to do. Again, as Mr. Holland said, Armed Society is a polite society, and I like the fact that we are doing things to make newer shooters and weaker shooters, and again, more feeble shooters, somebody that's not comfortable with some of the guns out there, have more of a comfort zone whenever they enter into our world that we're already so comfortable with. Guys, look, never be afraid, never be ashamed to be the safest person in the room and the deadliest.